What was your dad's name and age at the outbreak of war?
My father's name was Wilf Lavin, or Lavin, and he was born in 1910, so he'll have been, the outbreak of war was 39, so he was 29. So he was quite old actually to go to war, but of course he was a territorial, he was a volunteer. We were living down the south, actually I was born down the south, but he met my mother who lived in Brighton, and when the war started, the idea was to evacuate myself and my sister from the south coast where the invasion was going to come. But he also thought he should volunteer. But he volunteered for the territorials, which in the town was the 2nd 5th Battalion, the Durham Light Infantry. So that's how he got started actually. So he thought he was going to go away for a few months, and he didn't come back till 1946.
What regiment did your dad serve in?
To begin with, at the outbreak of war, or just before war, with the expansion of the Territorial Army, so we talk about 1938, the regiment was formed in West Hartlepool, Stockton, Darlington and Hordern, 4 companies making up the 2nd and the 5th Battalions of the Durham Light Infantry. So he served in the Durham Light Infantry prior to going to Normandy, when they were redesignated the regiment to Royal Artillery by arming them with 40mm guns. The idea at that time was, of course, infantrymen with light guns would support the infantry. So he was in 2 regiments, in other words. Durham Light Infantry redesignated to the Royal Artillery, but always maintaining that they were Durham Light Infantry. And if you look on anything, always they'll tell you, yes, we're 113th Light Hacker Regiment Royal Artillery, but we were still the Durham Light Infantry and we were Territorial Army soldiers. So that's 2 regiments, in other words.
How old were you at the beginning of war, and do you have any certain memories of when your father left for war?
Yes, I do actually. I was 6. And we'd come from the south because my father evacuated us here prior to the war starting, because he was from here but he was working down in the south coast near Brighton, where he met my mother. And his idea was to evacuate us from the south coast, where we were expecting Sea Lion, which was the invasion of England by Hitler, brought us up here, and his idea was to volunteer. But he wanted to volunteer for the Durham Light Infantry, so we came up here. I was 6-year-old, and I remember distinctly this particular, because we were living in Everett Street in Hartlepool at the time, and I can remember before war was declared, I was stood on the doorstep, and my father had his uniform on. But the uniform was the old-fashioned First World War uniform, the peak cap, the frock coat and the puttees, and his kit bag. And I remember him walking down the street, and I can remember this old lady saying to another old lady, "My God, it's starting all over again," meaning the First World War, Second World War. I remember that distinctly. I can also remember when the invasion of Normandy took place, the people who gone on the invasion, their relatives were sent notification in the way of a card more than anything, and all it said on the card was your son, brother, husband, and they'd cross out the various boxes which didn't apply. A member of the British Expeditionary Force has landed in Normandy, and little boxes down ticked which was applicable: has been killed, is missing, seriously wounded, or slightly wounded, and they just ticked those boxes. And it said at the end, telegram would follow. So they must have got all those out, and I can remember to this day women, especially women, running out there, and I remember this woman in Tankerville Street, because we lived not too far from there, rushing out and shouting, "Oh my son, oh my son." So she must have got a card saying he'd been killed. So I remember lots of things like that, actually.
How did you first know of your father's involvement in the liberation of Bergen-Belsen?
I didn't know till he came home. I really didn't know. And then, of course, he would never talk about it. But I can remember, I always remember my father as being quite dark-haired. When he came back, he was very grey. And I can remember him having nightmares for a long, long time. Of course, I didn't understand this, what was going on. And he never would speak about it to me as a child.
At what point did your dad first talk to you about his experience with Bergen-Belsen?
I can remember as a teenager, one or two people, when they saw reports of this, saying, "Oh, this doesn't happen, can't happen." I can always remember my father saying, "It did happen, I know it happened, I saw it happen." So as I became a man, probably 30s, then he started telling me certain things about how they arrested Joseph Kramer, the camp commandant, and Emma Gresser, who was the women's SS guard commandant, and how they were transported to Celle jail. They were tried, and not long after they were all hanged.
Why do you think it's important to talk about your father's story?
Well, it touches on that in that article in the Mail, which is pinned up on the wall there. When he had his funeral, and it was reported that he was one of the last survivors of the liberators of Belsen, I remember him saying, because the Bosnian War was going on then, and atrocities were being committed then, of course, and he was so upset to see this happen, very upset. As he said, "You know, we went through all of this, and it's happening again," which really upset him.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to summarise?
Well, also I'd like to add, because not a lot of people seem to know, I've told several people and they're always astonished when I tell them that a lot of West Hartlepool, Horden men were the liberators of Belsen. Territorial, part-time soldiers who've been through numerous battles to get there. They couldn't believe it. No. Lots of people have told me it was liberated by the Americans. The Americans liberated many, Buchenwald, and the Russians Auschwitz and Sobibor and Treblinka and all that. But the West Hartlepool men liberated Belsen, and I like people to know that, what part they played in it.